Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another video. Today, we're going to be reacting to some video game stuff, okay? Today, we got Saints Row, How Not to Save a Game. Now, Saints Row is one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, okay? Listen. Saints Row 2 was fantastic, okay? Saints Row 1 was okay, but Saints Row 2 was peak, okay? Saints Row 3, that one was okay. It was okay. It still had like the same charm. Story was kind of but you know, it was still, I would say, a Saints Row game. Saints Row 4, they kind of like went off the deep end. I still enjoyed that game. That's the game I kind of grew up with. I grew up with Saints Row 3 and Saints Row 4. I didn't fall in love with Saints Row 2 till like way later, but anyway, one of my favorite game franchises of all time. And then the new Saints Row game that came out, I think it was like 2 years ago or a year ago. I can't remember now, but not good. So, but this video goes into detail on how that happened. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Original video in the comments, and please show this person some love. Zach Lilypad. So some love. Thank you very much, and enjoy the video.
It wasn't long ago that Saints Row was a dominant franchise, selling millions of copies with each new entry. The open-world action series was a long-time critical and commercial success, but somewhere along the line, things changed. Saints Row has a pretty troubled history featuring tone shifts, publisher changes, and ultimately a failed reboot. These many problems eventually caught up to them, with series developer Volition being shut down in 2023.
That also heart fucking breaking. Volition shutting down 2 years ago, bro. I was like, there's no more Saints Row games, no more. Like I thought after they came out with the new one, the remake, I was like, well, maybe they'll learn their lesson. But honestly, they should have learned their lesson from Saints Row 4, and maybe got out of hell. But you know, let's continue on.
So in today's video, we'll figure out how exactly this happened. This is the story of Saints Row, and this is the story of how not to save a game. Development of what would become Saints Row began at Volition all the way back in 2003. At that time, the game was codenamed Bling Bling and was being developed for the PlayStation 2. The game would aim to feature a sandbox world with multiple storylines that could be progressed in whatever order the player chose, alongside a variety of different side activities. It was a very ambitious idea, and it quickly became clear the tech they were working with might not be totally up to the task. This caused Volition to shift focus to the
Well, Jak and Daxter came out at that point. That game was huge, and there was no loading screens, and I was on the PS2. Like, is Saints Row really that different? The first one, anyway? Because I played the first Saints Row, and oh my god. That shit is janky, but it's still good, I think. It has its moments. It has its, like, ideal moments, but anyway.
The next generation, and more specifically, the upcoming Xbox 360. The game was first revealed at E3 2005, alongside the official
Graphics, trash, by the way, just FYI.
name Saints Row. Journalists who got an early look praised the physics system, character customization, and lack of load times. However, there was one criticism that kept coming up, and it's one that Saints Row would struggle to shake off. The comparison to the Grand Theft Auto series was obvious. It doesn't take a gaming historian to see that these two games share a lot of similarities. The open world cities, the crime, the crass humor, it was all certainly very reminiscent of Rockstar's franchise. However, Volition had made some smart choices that actually put them in a pretty good position to potentially compete with the industry juggernaut. Since the game was coming to the Xbox 360 in 2006, it would hit the market before the next GTA, and be the first game of its kind on a 7th generation console. If Saints Row had released on PS2 as originally planned, people might have never given it the time of day, since there were already several beloved GTA games available on that platform. But by releasing it on 360, Saints Row would be the only new option, at least for a few years. Despite the media's obsession with calling the game a Grand Theft Auto clone, gamers didn't really seem to mind, and were just excited to see a game in this genre available so early in the 360 generation. The hype was incredibly high when the game finally released on August 29th, 2006. Saints Row takes place in Stillwater, a city that has been overrun by gangs. There are 3 rival groups inhabiting the city, all fighting for control. The main playable character finds themselves stuck in the middle of this war and ultimately gets saved by a member of a smaller gang known as the 3rd Street Saints. The Saints are hoping to reclaim the Saints Row district and recruit the player to aid them in this goal. The player helps increase the presence of the Saints within Stillwater through story missions, mini-games, and side activities as they eventually try to take control of the city. Alongside the main story was online multiplayer featuring a
the freaking multiplayer. I know a lot of people like it, but I did not. I'm not really big on the multiplayer side of things anyway. But I'm just not. There's people out there that's better at video games than me. That's all I'm gonna say. Like, I'm not good at video games at all.
Variety of different game modes. There was PvP and a co-op mode, but you couldn't play the whole story in co-op, you were instead restricted to specific missions. Upon release, Saints Row received favorable reviews, praised for its gameplay, characters, and technical achievements. The GTA comparisons were in full force once again, however many reviews did note that Saints Row managed to improve on its counterpart in some areas. Saints Row had introduced a dynamic map, showing where activities were taking place, alongside the ability to place waypoints that would react in real time based on the path you were taking. Both of these features are standard for games today, but for the time, it was seen as a massive quality of life improvement. With this in mind, I think the original Saints Row deserves a lot more credit than it
Sorry, that explosion.
Life improvement. With this in mind, I think the original Saints Row deserves a lot more credit than it gets for its impact on the industry. It's undeniable that many of the ideas and features found here would come to define open world games for the next several years. The way that you can move through the different neighborhoods, completing missions and clearing out all the points of interest sounds awfully similar to the Ubisoft style that would come to define the early 2010s.
Bro, I didn't think about that. Whoa. Ubisoft ripped off Volition? I never thought about it like that. I gotta rethink. Bro, Ubisoft fell off too. My God, they're probably gonna be bankrupt soon, and that means no more Assassin's Creeds, which, I mean, like, is that a bad thing?
It's a shame that so many wrote the game off at the time as just another GTA clone, when there were actually some pretty inventive ideas here. The good news though is that this GTA comparison didn't seem to hurt the game all too much, as it was a huge commercial success for THQ and Volition. Saints Row had sold over 2 million copies by 2008. That number was especially impressive since the game was only ever available on one platform. There were plans for a PlayStation 3 version, including an official announcement in 2007, but that ultimately never came to fruition. Before researching for this video, I was always under the impression that Microsoft had paid for some sort of exclusivity rights for the game, but I can't find any confirmation of that. It seems more likely that Volition was just struggling to port the game to the PlayStation 3, which was not uncommon at that time due to the console's difficult to develop for architecture.
PS3 was very, very much like I always heard horror stories on like how much miserable it was to make video games on that thing because it just wouldn't run correctly, and like it's just funny to me. I don't know. I don't know why that's funny, but I think it's funny.
Additionally, Volition was busy working on their next game and chose to put all their energy into that project instead. Development of Saints Row 2 began before the original game had even been released, showing THQ's confidence in the IP. This confidence was rewarded following the success of the first game, with the sequel confirmed by THQ's CEO in February 2007. First details of the game began coming out in May 2008, and although fans were excited, Saints Row 2 was going to face an uphill battle. We talked about how the first game had benefited from beating Grand Theft Auto to the 7th generation. Well, its sequel would be doing the exact opposite, releasing in the very same year as GTA 4 and directly competing against it. But Volition was up to the challenge and confident that their game could stand on its own. Producer Greg Donovan told IGN that open world is a genre, and there is room for more than just one game in a genre. Donovan also states that Saints Row 2 is going to offer a much different experience than the competition competition, focusing
Very true.
more on what he describes as over-the-top moments. And indeed, Saints Row 2 would be opting for a slightly more cartoonish and comedic vibe. This would be in stark contrast to GTA 4, which would ironically end up as the most dark and serious entry in its respective franchise. Saints Row 2 would also be bringing the franchise off the Xbox 360 for the first time, releasing on PS3 on day one, alongside a planned PC port coming at a later date. Saints Row 2 takes place 4 years after the events of the first game.
I don't know about nowadays, but the PC port's not good.
In the time that's passed, the Saints have disbanded, with many of the members being arrested. The player must work to rebuild the Saints, breaking them out of jail and gaining new recruits. The player ends up becoming the leader of the Saints, aka the boss, and chooses to try and take over Stillwater once again. At this point, the game follows a similar formula as its predecessor, fighting against 3 different rival gangs and clearing out districts of the city. In terms of gameplay, Saints Row 2 is also very similar to the first game, choosing to improve on what they had done before instead of reinventing the wheel. They refined elements like gunplay and driving, while creating a much larger world to explore. Some of the improvements could be seen as marginal, but when they all add together, it leaves the game feeling like a true improvement over what came before it. Alongside the single-player campaign, Saints Row 2 once again places an emphasis on multiplayer, and this time it's even better. PvP modes return, but the true standout was the improvements to co-op. This time around, the entire campaign could be played in co-op with no restrictions. That was a pretty incredible accomplishment for a game this large to pull off in 2008. Upon release, Saints Row 2 once again received favorable reviews, with many centering around the same simple word: fun. Saints Row 2 may not have been the most technically sound game, it may not have evolved the series all that much, and it may not have even been the best game of its kind released that year, but it was undeniably fun. And sometimes that's all a video game needs to be. Saints Row 2 takes this mentality and runs with it, creating a truly wacky gameplay experience. Saints Row 2 sales were decent, with the game reportedly shipping over 2 million copies by the end of 2008. However, this number was said to be below internal expectations. By September 2010, the game had sold a total of 3.4 million units. Again, not a terrible number by any means, but slightly less than THQ was hoping for. When you consider the first game was able to sell 2 million on just one platform, 3.4 million across 3 different platforms isn't all that great. Still though, Saints Row 2 was extremely important for the franchise. Not only had it been a very well-received game, but the new ideas and themes helped differentiate it from GTA, and in many ways legitimized the series. It seemed Volition had started to find a lane they could fit into, which would allow Saints Row to stand on its own rather than continue being called a copycat. This updated style would heavily influence the next entry and dominate the next several years of the franchise.
You know, like, I get why people call it a GTA clone, but if you think about it, Battlefield and Call of Duty were out like around the same time too. So I mean, technically, shouldn't they call Battlefield a Call of Duty clone since Call of Duty did it first? But they don't call it that because it's a lot different than Call of Duty, in my opinion. Tisk 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 gamers, tisk tisk tisk.
Development on a third Saints Row game began in 2008, and the team quickly found themselves with a big decision to make. They would need to decide once and for all what exactly Saints Row was going to be. Volition design director Scott Phillips gave a speech at GDC in 2000.
Holy shit, Coca-Cola owns Fanta? Why are we here? Just to suffer. I didn't know this.
2012, which gave some great insight into what the team was thinking. As Phillips describes it, the strategy behind Saints Row 2 boiled down to let's throw everything we can think of into the game. While this mentality led to some of the game's most fun moments, it also caused it to feel a bit disjointed at times. One minute you'd be doing something extremely silly, and the next you're watching a brutal killing. Another problem Volition was facing at the time was a high level of turnover amongst their staff. Phillips claimed only 20% of the people who worked to ship Saints Row III had shipped a prior entry. As you can imagine, this meant there weren't a ton of people left in the room who even knew what Saints Row was supposed to be in the first place. The team spent a lot of time trying to answer this question, eventually creating tone videos that mixed together different songs and movie clips. One video they created featuring many classic action movies seemed to stand out from the rest. Using this as the backdrop, the team began to make some progress, and would soon stumble upon a discovery that would come to define the game. Believe it or not, I am referring to the notorious dildo bat weapon. This weapon motivated the team to fully embrace the chaos and choose fun over everything. Maybe then, their franchise could finally stand on its own and stop being compared to Grand Theft Auto once and for all. With the inspiration of the phallic baseball bat in the back of their minds, the team went full steam ahead with this new direction. From even just a few seconds of gameplay, the stylistic change is clear. The game is more colorful, with crazy action and a much wider range of weapons and vehicles to use. The story gets crazier too, taking the Saints to a new city called Steelport. In Steelport, the Saints find themselves hoping to build their brand into a media empire alongside their criminal activities. Throughout the game, the player will find themselves fighting rival gangs, KGB agents, and even wrestlers through some absolutely insane action sequences. The core gameplay is the same open-world sandbox style, but with everything else turned up to 100. In the end, the absurdity of Saints Row III seemed to strike a chord with audiences. When the game was released in November 2011, it reviewed higher than the previous two entries in the franchise. Fans and critics agreed Saints Row had seemed to find its footing with this new direction, and finally build an image of its own. The game was described as an open-world adult theme park where seemingly anything you could imagine was available. Once again, Volition had nailed the concept that
it was very different to what GTA ever will be. Like literally, I think they that really like formed together what Saints Row was like this unserious gangsters, in my opinion. Which this game turned into more, like third one turned into more like, used to be gangsters, but now they lived on their high horse for so long they forgot what it means to be a gangster, and so now they're just moving on from that. And like I said, I think this game is great. Like the boss is still like a fucking psychotic, murderous, puckish rogue, if you will. And I don't know, like I thought this game was great. Like if I had to pick right now, like my list on like best to good, best to worst, probably be Saints Row 2, Saints Row 3, Saints Row 4, Saints Row 1, then Get Out of the Hell, then the remake. That's my list right there.
Many teams seem to forget, which is that video games are supposed to be fun. Alongside the positive reception came new sales records for the franchise. Saints Row III had reportedly sold 5.5 million units by the end of 2012, well surpassing the prior entries after just barely one full year on the market. Overall, things seemed to be going extremely well. The franchise was bigger than ever, and had finally found its own unique identity that could separate it from the competition. Unfortunately, just when it seemed time for a Saints Row Golden Age, things started to take a turn. Saints Row's publisher, THQ, was struggling big time. For the past several years, the company had been in financial turmoil, with no clear direction of how they were going to get out of it. One year, they would be making U-Draw tablet kids games, and by the next year, they would decide they were done with licensed kids games entirely. THQ was just completely lost. In 2012, the company reportedly lost over $200 million and were forced to file for bankruptcy by the end of the year. This led to a fire sale of THQ's franchises and games, all being spread across the industry. The Warhammer 40K license went to Sega, the WWE license went to Take-Two, and South Park went to Ubisoft. But what about Saints Row? Volition's franchise would get picked up by Deep Silver, the publisher best known for the Dead Island series. Seeing Deep Silver take control of the Saints Row franchise was a bit concerning. Deep Silver had published some good stuff over the years, but they had also published a whole lot of bad stuff, and I mean really bad. Many Saints Row fans held their breath as they waited to see how this publisher change would affect the future of the franchise. Prior to this publisher change, Volition had already begun developing the next Saints Row entry, known internally as Saints Row Part 4. It was planned to be a direct continuation of the third game, with a similar story and gameplay style. However, things changed. As an April Fool's joke in 2012, Volition announced an expansion for Saints Row III titled Enter the Dominatrix. It was said to feature superpowers, aliens, and all other kinds of wild new weapons. Despite initially being called a joke, the expansion actually did go into development and was planned for release. However, with THQ's previously mentioned financial struggles, leadership pushed for the expansion to be turned.
Oh, by the way, this poster in the background here. This is supposed to be like all the main characters, right? That, I'm pretty sure, is Matt Miller. And he looks so freaking ugly in this. If this is what he's supposed to look like, oh boy, Matt. He looks so much better in the game than he does right here. Like, and they all look different too, by the way. Like, Pierce looks different. That's supposed to be Shaundi, and that's supposed to be Kinzie. Like, maybe like they're hot cousins, maybe, but come on now.
Turned into a full game. Additionally, the team had set a goal to release Saints Row Part 4 before next-generation consoles hit store shelves in late 2013. This goal would be almost impossible if the team was split between Enter the Dominatrix and Part 4. So the decision was made to move away from the original vision, adapting the expansion into the next full entry, which would now be titled Saints Row 4. Following the positive reception to Saints Row III, the team leaned even further into the absurdity that players now expected. Series producer Jim Boone said they saw a lot of fans wondering if the series could ever get more over the top than they already had, and the team took that as a challenge. I'd say they were certainly able to live up to that challenge, with the plot of Saints Row 4 placing you as the President of the United States fighting off an alien invasion. And if that somehow wasn't crazy enough for you, you also have superpowers now. They definitely kicked it up a notch, but the question is, was that really such a great idea? Saints Row 4 did receive some good reception early on, but it didn't seem to have the same impact that Saints Row III had. I think there are a few reasons for this. For one, Saints Row 4 dropped mere weeks before the latest installment in the Grand Theft Auto series, GTA 5. Although Saints Row 2 had taken GTA 4 head-on in the past, those release dates were months apart, not just a few weeks. It also didn't help that GTA 5 ended up being just a little bit bigger than GTA 4. However, I don't think this was the biggest problem. I think the superpower aspect they introduced was a big mistake. Yeah. While it did help further differentiate...
Yeah, no, he probably will explain this, but in my opinion, the powers did take away a lot of what I think Saints Row was. Like, for example, steal cars, shoot them up, or anything like that. Get a jet, fly a helicopter, attack a helicopter, destroy all these cars around you. But when you got powers, like, you can literally jump high and glide for miles once you get to a certain point. So there's really no point in driving anyway. And it's in Steelport. It's no Stillwater. Stillwater like had character. There was like areas that you could recognize, and like you can go to a park, you can go into a mall, like you can do all these type of things. But in Steelport, it's literally just like 3 islands connected to a bridge, and there's no character to it. Really, the only place that I think that has like any character is where what is that shop called? That emo one. I forget what it's called, but it's like Nobody Loves Me or something like that. That's what it's called. That whole strip where that strip club is at too. Like that's like the most character that whole map has. And it's a shame, it really is.
Saints Row from GTA, it ended up making it more similar to other games on the market, such as Infamous and Prototype, two series that...
Oh shit, bruh. He said it, not me.
That also featured a character with powers in an open world city. So now, Saints Row is not only being compared to GTA, but also these other games. Once again, they seemed stuck without an identity of their own. Early sales of the game seemed promising, selling 1 million copies in the first week. However, Volition and Deep Silver never released any future sales numbers, which doesn't seem to bode all too well. You would think if sales had been strong, they would have wanted to let everybody know. Based on this lack of sales data, I would say it's safe to assume the game did not outsell Saints Row III, and maybe not even Saints Row 2. As the years have gone on, the core Saints Row community has been pretty rough on Saints Row 4, and often point to it as the beginning of the end for the series. Most all agree it's a fun game.
It's like I said that or something.
But it just strays way too far from what Saints Row was ever supposed to be. In Volition's quest to one-up what they had done with the third game, they lost sight of what made the franchise great in the first place. For example, guns and cars take a huge backseat since you don't really need those things when you have superpowers. The characters aren't the scruffy criminals they used to be, and the story just becomes nonsensical at times. And it didn't feel like much of a step up from the third game in terms of graphics or features. It's pretty clear what Volition was going for. They saw the positive response to the third game's wildness and tried to expand on it, but they just went too far and ended up with a game that didn't quite hit the mark, at least in my opinion. Although Saints Row 4 had some major faults, it was generally considered a decent, fun game. However, the next—
Hey, don't get me wrong, it's still a fun game. Like, fly around superpowers and all that, beating up aliens is sick. Don't get me wrong.
Next two Saints Row projects from Volition would be received much worse. These two games marked a bit of a different direction for the franchise, moving away from the player-created boss character we had spent so many years playing as. Volition noticed many fans had taken more of a liking to the side characters as opposed to the main playable character, and wanted to focus on that instead. The first project to come from this experiment was Gat Out of Hell, a standalone expansion to Saints Row 4. Gat Out of Hell featured franchise staple Johnny Gat fighting through hell after Satan kidnaps the boss. This expansion signified a further shift away from the crime-based city gameplay of the past, and was ultimately not received very well at all. The game was very repetitive and buggy, and didn't feel like a big improvement for the franchise, which was frustrating since it was the first new Saints Row game on PS4 and Xbox One consoles. Following this, Volition continued trying to expand the Saints Row universe with a new game titled—
Oh my god, I totally forgot about this one. Oh, Saint Agents or whatever the fuck. Oh my god, I totally forgot about that. Holy shit, they did that fucking Crackdown ripoff. Oh my god.
Agents of Mayhem. The main gimmick of this game would be the ability to choose between 12 different playable characters, and switch between them as you took on missions. Sadly, this game is just not very good at all. It feels lifeless compared to the other Saints Row games, and similar to Gat Out of Hell, it was extremely repetitive and glitchy. One thing in particular that always really bothered me about this game was the lack of co-op play. Co-op had been a Saints Row staple, but was missing in Agents of Mayhem. This is truly bizarre, as the game places a specific focus on trios, meaning it would have been a better fit for co-op than any other game in the franchise. I also think Agents of Mayhem is weird because it took away any sign of Saints Row branding, but is still clearly a Saints Row game at its core. Why drop your recognizable brand name for a game still set in the same series? Agents of Mayhem came and went in a flash, only selling a measly 300,000 copies as of last reported numbers. Following these two disappointing releases, Volition found themselves taking a step back and reflecting on the franchise for the next several years, putting a pause on new games. The Saints Row franchise found itself in a tough spot. We know the last several games had not met expectations, but there was a much bigger problem here. There had been a growing rift between the Saints Row fanbase. One side preferred the more grounded style found in Saints Row 1 and 2, but the other side had come to know and love Saints Row for the wild absurdity found in Saints Row 3 and 4. For Volition, there wasn't a clear answer. On the one hand, going back to the old school style would appease hardcore fans, but it can't be ignored that Saints Row III was the best-selling game in the series. So while the core audience may have been asking for one thing, the market was seemingly asking for another. However, sticking by the absurdity seemed troublesome as well. They had set an expectation that every game needed to be bigger and crazier and wackier than the last, but at a certain point that just becomes untenable. There's only so much you can do before you start to lose sight of what the franchise was ever supposed to be in the first place, as evidenced by Saints Row 4. If this franchise was going to continue and hopefully thrive, Volition was going to have to make a choice. Would they return to the franchise roots, or continue pushing the series in its new direction? Well, if you picked neither option, you should apply to be a gaming executive because you would fit right in. We first heard of a new Saints Row being in development in 2019, but it was unclear at that time what exactly the direction would be. As we got closer to the official reveal, it became clear it would be a reboot, potentially with the goal of taking the franchise back to its beginning. This came alongside a now infamous teaser photo featuring the word rebooting on a graffiti background, a clear nod to the style of Saints Row 1 and 2. This got the community extremely excited, and they wouldn't have to wait long, as the reveal was coming just a few days after this teaser at Gamescom 2021. Unfortunately, this fan excitement would quickly turn to anger following the official announcement. The 3-minute CG trailer was met with near unanimous hate. First of all, the trailer didn't give off any of the old school classic Saints Row vibes that had been teased. Fans felt they had been purposefully deceived with the graffiti art image, since no semblance of that style was found in the trailer. It didn't help that the trailer featured a cast of characters we had never seen before, all of which had uninspired designs alongside some cringy dialogue. Things escalated when Volition chose to argue with fans in response to the backlash. In the days following the reveal, the official Saints Row Twitter account sent out some pretty feisty stuff. One user innocently asking for a return of fan-favorite characters was sternly told their stories are done. In response to another user comparing the new character designs to Fortnite, the account stated, "We don't think you know what Fortnite looks like." Eventually, the account tweeted, "We are not backing down on this game," and boiled down the negative response as nothing more than a shock reaction to something new. I think it goes without saying this was the worst possible thing they could have done. Why bicker with fans and question their intelligence because they don't like your trailer? Some of these tweets they responded to are from accounts with barely any followers. It's almost like they were searching out posts they could argue with. I can certainly respect a dev team sticking by their vision and being confident in their choices, but you need to sell that to your audience through great trailers and gameplay showcases, not by insulting them on Twitter. Everything got off on the wrong foot with this reboot. At this point, they were going to have to deliver something truly game-changing to win back their community. The big day finally came on August 23rd, 2022, when the reboot, simply titled Saints Row, was released. The response was once again extremely negative. The game received poor reviews from critics, primarily due to glitches, poor writing, and outdated gameplay. Fans, meanwhile, were distraught at what Volition had done to the franchise. This reboot centers around a new cast of characters, the player character and their roommates, as the group works together to form a new gang. This crew was the major sticking point that many fans just could not get past. Not only did they miss the old—
So you're telling me this guy right here, this guy right here, telling me he is in a gang. A gang. Mans is in a gang. Okay? A gang. No. Look at him. Okay? Look at him. A gang. Her in a gang? Funny. Her in a gang? You're funny. Him? Maybe.
Major sticking point that many fans just could not get past. Not only did they miss the old characters, but these new ones weren't particularly likable. They were often described as hipster, with that grating style of writing where everything they say—
okay, I remember that. That's one of this is what's wrong with being a hipster. I was a hipster in high school. Okay, let's just chill out with the hipster slander. Okay.
Is snarky or sarcastic. These characters that were trying so desperately hard to be quirky seemed more in line with the new age of Saints Row, but that was a pretty strange direction to go since the rest of the game doesn't fall in line with modern Saints Row games. There's no superpowers here, no insanely over-the-top moments, and no sex toys made into weaponry. It's just a very standard open-world sandbox game. Volition managed to make a game that angered both sides of the fanbase at the same time for completely different reasons. Quite an impressive feat if you ask me. My personal least favorite part about Saints Row 2022 is the visuals. Where are the colors and flash that defined Saints Row, even in its early days? Everything is bland, partly due to the desert city setting causing the environment around you to be nothing but beige sand at all times. If I looked at this game without context, I would have no idea this was a Saints Row game at all. The purple waypoints would have probably been my only clue. Ironically, Saints Row 2022 ends up feeling like a generic GTA clone, the very stigma the series had spent so many years trying to break free of. Listen, I don't want to oversell it. Saints Row 2022 isn't the worst game ever made by any means, but in some ways it's actually worse than that. Truly terrible games can at least be fun to play and laugh at, but Saints Row 2022 doesn't even have that going for it. It's aggressively forgettable. As you can imagine, this reboot wasn't all too successful. They did claim the game was profitable, but acknowledged that it had left fans polarized and was not the fresh start they were hoping for. With no momentum or clear direction left for the franchise, the decision was made to close Volition in August 2023, ending the 30-year run for the studio and leaving the Saints Row IP presumably dead. It's a depressing ending to what was once a legendary franchise and developer. As I reflect on the story of Saints Row, part of me feels for Volition. There was so much outside of their control that hurt the series. First of all, I feel like Saints Row was never given a fair shot. Constantly being diminished as just a GTA clone forced the developers down a path that lost sight of the original vision. Instead of being able to make games the way they wanted to make them, Volition felt they needed to get crazy and over the top to prove they weren't a copycat. This worked well at first with Saints Row the Third, but the constant need to improve and one-up each entry was just not sustainable. The constant turmoil of their publishers THQ and Deep Silver certainly didn't help matters either. However, Volition is not blameless here. Starting with Saints Row 4, the quality of the series started to decrease significantly. Even if you enjoyed the more unconventional style, it was undeniable that the games were of worse quality, constantly launching in bad states with glitches and poor performance. And of course, it all culminated into the disastrous reboot. On paper, I think a reboot was the correct decision for the franchise. Over the years, the Saints Row fanbase had splintered into two different sides, both wanting wildly different things. Volition was
another thing too. I'm pretty sure they ripped off Wrench from Watch Dogs 2 with that guy, because Watch Dogs 2 came out, I was like in high school, and this game came out in 2022, so I mean, like, obviously they did.
Right to start over and pick a finalized direction. Unfortunately, they picked a direction that managed to anger both sides of their audience and left no one feeling satisfied. Instead of listening to the concerns of their fans, Volition instead chose to chastise them on Twitter and ruin any goodwill they may have had left. In many ways, the story of Saints Row is a lesson to not let outside noise affect game development and alter your decision making. Knowing what we know now, it was pretty much over for this series the second they gave in to the GTA-loving haters and moved away from what the franchise was ever supposed to be. It's a sad story, but one that is ultimately not all too surprising. For a series surrounded by so much controversy and negativity since its very inception, was it ever going to end any other way? I hope you enjoyed this retrospective on the history of Saints Row, and the first episode of my new series. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, it helps out the channel a ton. And let me know what other games you would like to see me talk about on how to save a game or how not to save a game in the comments below. Thanks for watching.
Wow. This is a good video. Good video. Like I said, Zach LilyPad. Very good video. Give it a like. Like I said, I put the original video in the description. I mean, the comment section. Show this video some love. And I hope you guys enjoyed. If you want any more videos, just let me know. Put it in the comments which videos you want me to react to, and I will get to them. And please subscribe. And there's going to be a video here to pop up. Please click on it if you really want to. It would be nice. Subscribe, maybe. Give this video a like, and I'll really appreciate it. Alrighty. See you guys in the next one.